Nurse Elena Ward was standing beside the folded blue flag in the hospital auditorium when Dr. Malcolm Strake pointed across the stage and said, "That nurse does not belong near this ceremony." Every camera turned. Every uniform in the first 3 rows went still. Elena's hand hovered over a small brass nameplate on the memorial table, the one she had quietly turned upright because someone had placed it backward. The plate held only 2 initials, EW, and a faded operation code no civilian hospital file was supposed to contain. Dr. Strake stepped down from the podium with his metal ribbon shining under the lights. "Stop touching things you don't understand," he said. Elena lowered her hand, but she did not move away. Then Admiral Julian Mercer took the microphone, read her badge aloud, and froze. "Before this story continues, tell us in the comments what country you are watching from. And if you believe quiet people often carry the heaviest truths, subscribe to Forgotten Honor Files. Because stories like Elena's remind us that honor is not always loud when it enters a room." The auditorium at Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center had been polished until it looked less like a hospital wing and more like a courtroom for memory. Rows of chairs faced a low stage draped in navy blue. Behind the podium stood framed photographs of evacuation teams, trauma units, field surgeons, nurses, pilots, and medics, whose names had become part of the hospital's proudest legend. The ceremony was supposed to restore dignity to a forgotten mission called Operation Grey Lantern, a classified medical evacuation from years before that had only recently been cleared for public acknowledgement. Elena Ward had not planned to be anywhere near the stage. She had been assigned to the back row as a floor nurse, the kind who checked on elderly guests, guided wheelchairs through narrow aisles, whispered directions to confused families, and noticed when a veteran's hand began trembling before anyone else did. She wore plain white scrubs under a dark hospital cardigan. Her hair was pinned in a simple twist, and the only thing on her chest was a standard hospital badge that read Elena Ward, RN, Trauma Recovery. Nothing about her looked ceremonial. That was how she preferred it. But 10 minutes before the Admiral arrived, Director Evelyn Cho had asked Elena to help straighten the memorial table. A young volunteer had mixed up several brass nameplates while setting them beneath the photographs. Most were obvious: full names, ranks, dates, units. But one small plate had been placed upside down at the corner, almost hidden by the folded flag. It read, EW, Raven Bell. Elena had seen the plate and felt the room fall away. Not because it was wrong, because it was too right. For a moment she forgot the cameras, the guests, the surgeon at the podium rehearsing his remarks. She remembered a radio hissing under storm noise, a young voice asking if anyone was still there, a stretcher wheel locking in sand, a hand closing around her wrist and refusing to let go. She remembered saying, "Raven Bell is still open," even though every report later said the field station had gone silent before rescue. Her fingers touched the brass plate gently, not like a nurse adjusting a display, but like someone touching a grave. That was when Dr. Malcolm Strake saw her. Strake was the hospital's celebrated trauma surgeon, the man whose name was printed in gold on the program. He had a sharp jaw, silver hair, and a voice built for microphones. The public knew him as the surgeon who had led the first recognized medical response after Grey Lantern. He had given interviews about pressure, command, discipline, and the loneliness of being the only one willing to make hard decisions. Elena had watched those interviews from break rooms with the sound muted. She had never corrected them. Now Strake walked toward her in front of admirals, donors, residents, families, and cameras. "What are you doing?" he asked. Elena turned the brass plate so it faced the room. It was backward. His eyes dropped to the initials. Something flickered across his face too fast for most people to catch. Elena caught it. Surgeons were trained to hide fear in their hands, but nurses learned to see fear in the pause before a breath. He lifted his arm and pointed at her. That nurse does not belong near this ceremony. The sentence cracked through the auditorium. Director Cho rose, halfway from her seat. Nurse Mia Torres, standing by the aisle with a stack of programs, looked up in alarm. A few guests turned to see whether Elena had broken something, stolen something, offended someone important. Elena did none of those things. She simply stood beside the memorial table with her hands folded at her waist. Strake's voice sharpened. This is a military honor ceremony, not a staff lounge. Step away from the display. A murmur moved through the room. Elena felt the old instinct rise in her, the one that told her to stay calm when a room lost discipline. Do not match volume. Do not defend ego. Preserve the patient. Preserve the mission. Preserve the truth until truth can survive the room. There was an error on the table, she said. You are not authorized to decide what is an error. Her throat tightened, but her face did not change. No, doctor, no. Strake gave a small laugh, almost pleased that she had given him a word he could twist. Then, why are your hands on a classified memorial marker? The room went quieter. Classified. The word changed the air. People who had been annoyed became curious. People who had been curious became suspicious. A camera operator adjusted his lens. The hospital chaplain lowered his program. An old Navy captain in the second row leaned forward. Elena looked at the brass plate again. E.W. Raven Bell. She should have walked away. She should have let the plate remain backward. Let the ceremony praise the official names. Let the wrong people stand under the lights. She had done that for years. She had let the wound stay closed because opening it would pull living people into old pain. But the plate was not only hers. It belonged to everyone who had been erased with her. Doctor, she said softly, that marker should not be hidden under the flag. Strake stepped closer. Do not lecture me about honor. Mia moved as if to help, but Director Cho shook her head once, frightened of making the scene worse. The donors stared. A junior resident whispered, Is that the nurse from trauma recovery? Someone else answered, I think so. The quiet one. Strake raised his voice enough for the back row. This ceremony recognizes command-level medical leadership. It is not for every employee who wants to feel connected to history. A few people looked away, embarrassed for Elena. That was the cruelty of public humiliation. It made witnesses pretend they had not heard, because hearing required courage. Elena's fingers curled around the edge of her cardigan. She could have said, I was there. She could have said, You know I was there. Instead, she saw a younger man's face in memory, pale with fear but alive, asking her to promise that his father would not learn how afraid he had been. She had made that promise. She had kept worse promises than that. So Elena only said, I understand. Strake smiled as if he had won. Then stepped down before Elena could move. The auditorium doors opened. 2 officers entered first. Then Admiral Julian Mercer walked in. He was taller than Elena, remembered from old photographs, but older than the nation, remembered from news clips. His white uniform was perfect. His face held the discipline of a man who had spent a lifetime refusing to collapse in public. The applause rose at once, grateful and polished. Strake turned toward him with relief. The ceremony could still be saved. The awkward nurse could disappear. The Admiral would speak. The medal would be presented. The cameras would capture the right faces. Admiral Mercer approached the podium, but his eyes caught the tension before anyone explained it. He looked from Strake, pointed hand to Elena's still posture, then to the brass plate on the table. What happened here? He asked. Strake answered quickly. A staff nurse interfered with a restricted display. Admiral, I was correcting the matter. Mercer's gaze moved to Elena's badge. Elena Ward. He read aloud. The name left his mouth in a normal voice. Then the Admiral froze. It was not dramatic at first. He did not gasp. He did not step back. He simply stopped moving, as if someone had cut power to every command inside him. His hand remained on the podium. His eyes stayed fixed on the badge. The applause died unevenly. As people noticed the silence, Strake's smile faded. Director Cho stood fully now. Admiral Mercer did not answer her. He looked at Elena as if he were seeing two people at once. The nurse in plain scrubs, and someone hidden behind years of sealed paper. "Say your name again," he said. Elena's heartbeat struck hard once. The room waited. "Elena Ward," she said. The Admiral's face changed. Not recognition exactly. Shock, grief, disbelief. His eyes dropped to the brass plate. "E.W. Raven Bell. Raven Bell." He whispered something only the first row heard. "That is impossible." And for the first time all morning, Dr. Malcolm Strake looked afraid. No one in the auditorium moved for several seconds. The hospital screen still showed the ceremony title in blue and white. A violin recording played faintly from the sound system until a technician, realizing the music had become unbearable, lowered it to silence. On stage, Admiral Mercer kept his eyes on Elena Ward, as though a sealed door had opened in front of him, and a ghost had stepped through wearing hospital shoes. Elena did not know which hurt more, being humiliated by Strake or being recognized by Mercer. She had spent years making peace with anonymity. Not happily, not easily, but carefully. She had built a life inside ordinary duties. She took night shifts because fewer people asked questions at 3 in the morning. She trained new nurses to look patients in the eye. She corrected medication charts, held shaking hands, found blankets before families asked, and never let anyone call her a hero. Hero was a dangerous word. It belonged to people the world could safely praise. Elena's truth had never been safe. Admiral Mercer leaned toward the microphone, then stopped himself. Whatever question had risen in him was too private for a public room. Dr. Strake recovered first. "Admiral," he said, forcing a laugh that fooled no one, "I think there might be some confusion. Nurse Ward has been with Harbor Ridge for only 3 years. Trauma, recovery, civilian staff. Excellent employee, perhaps, but not connected to Grey Lantern." Mercer turned slowly toward him. "Did I ask you?" The words were quiet, but the auditorium felt them like a door shutting. Strake's face tightened. "No, sir." Mercer looked back at Elena. "Nurse Ward, why is your name attached to a marker from Raven Bell?" A low murmur spread. Raven Bell had not appeared in the public program. The guests had heard Operation Grey Lantern. They had heard rescue team, field station, evacuation route, casualty stabilization. But Raven Bell sounded different, smaller, more secret. A phrase from inside the mission, not from the speeches written after it. Elena chose her words with the care of someone crossing a cracked bridge. "I don't know how that marker got here." "That is not what I asked." "No, Admiral." He waited, her eyes lifted to his. "It should have stayed in the archive." A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Director Cho looked from Elena to Mercer, realizing her quiet nurse had just admitted knowledge she could not possibly have. Mia Torres took one step closer to the aisle, her face full of alarm and loyalty. Strake saw the room shifting and moved to stop it. "This is exactly why I intervened," he said. "Staff rumors around classified material can damage reputations. Admiral, with respect, anyone can read initials and invent significance." Elena turned her head toward him then, not sharply, not angrily. That almost made it worse. "You know Raven Bell was never in the public file," she said. Strake's expression hardened. "I know many things that are not in public files." I see, Elena said. "You do." The words were soft, but they landed with weight. Admiral Mercer looked between them. Director Cho, clear the cameras. The camera operators hesitated, unsure whether the Admiral had authority over hospital media. Director Cho did not hesitate. She signaled security, and the red recording lights went dark one by one. No one leaves, Mercer added. The audience stirred. Some guests looked offended. Others looked thrilled in the way people do when they sense a scandal forming. But the military officers in the front row understood his tone. They remained seated. Mercer lowered the microphone. Commander Quinn, a woman in service dress, stepped from the side aisle. She had arrived with the Admiral's staff and had the hard calm of someone who carried bad news for a living. Yes, Admiral, contact records. I want the sealed Gray Lantern Annex. Commander Mara. Quinn glanced once at Elena. Sir, that file requires 2 authorization keys. Use mine. And the second. Mercer's jaw tightened. Find out who authorized that marker for display. Strake spoke too quickly. I did. The Hospital Archives Committee approved it as part of the memorial arrangement. Quinn turned to him. You authorized a Raven Bell marker. Strake's mouth opened, then closed. The room noticed. Elena looked down. She had seen proud men survive mistakes by making everyone else feel foolish for noticing. Strake had mastered that art. In trauma conferences, when residents questioned him, he smiled until they sounded naive. In board meetings, when nurses raised concerns, he translated their warnings into his own language and received credit for being decisive. During Gray Lantern, he had been younger but not different, brilliant, admired, ambitious, terrified of being seen as anything less than necessary. Director Cho stepped toward Elena. Nurse Ward, are you all right? It was a simple question. It nearly broke her. Elena nodded once. Yes, ma'am. But Mia, who had worked beside her through enough night shifts to read the spaces between Elena's words, whispered, No, she's not. Strake heard it. This is not a nursing lounge, Miss Torres. Mia flushed, but did not step back. No, doctor. It's a ceremony where you just pointed at her like she stole something. A few people inhale. Mia was young, talented, and often too honest for hospital politics. Elena loved that about her and feared for her because of it. Mia, Elena said quietly. Mia pressed her lips together, but her eyes stayed bright with anger. Admiral Mercer watched that exchange too. Something in his expression softened, then folded back into command. Nurse Ward, he said. Come with us. Strake objected at once. Admiral, if this concerns institutional records, I should be present. Mercer did not look at him. You will be. That answer satisfied no one. They moved from the auditorium into a side conference room used for donor receptions. Through the glass wall, Elena could still see the stage, the chairs, the guests waiting in confused clusters. The memorial table remained under the lights. The brass plate glinted from its corner, no longer hidden. Inside the conference room, Commander Quinn opened a secure laptop. Director Cho stood near the door, pale with professional dread. Strake positioned himself beside the conference table as if proximity to power could restore his authority. Mia lingered just outside until Elena turned and gave her a small nod. Director Cho, seeing it, allowed her in. It mattered that Mia stayed. Elena needed at least one person in the room who had known her before the name became dangerous. Quinn's fingers moved across the keyboard. The public Gray Lantern record lists field. Surgical support under Strake. Malcolm A. Then 3 unnamed nurses, 2 corpsmen, 1 flight medic, and local allied staff. Raven Bell Annex is sealed under casualty communication protocols. Mercer's voice was rough. Open the personnel index. Quinn entered his authorization. Quinn frowned. That is strange. What? The second authorization is not held by the Archives Committee. Strake folded his arms. Then the file is corrupted. Old military databases are not exactly sacred scripture. Quinn ignored him. The second lock is assigned to a survivor privacy seal. Mercer's eyes darkened. Ooh. Quinn looked up slowly. Lelena Ward. The room went silent again. Director Cho turned toward Elena. You have a survivor privacy seal on a classified military annex? Elena's answer came out almost soundless. I requested it. Strake laughed once, but there was panic under it. Requested? As a civilian nurse? Elena looked at him. No, the word hung there. Mia stared at her. Elena felt that stare like a hand reaching for her sleeve. Mia knew her as the nurse who brought instant coffee to interns, who kept protein bars in the medication room for staff, who forgot to eat, who once spent her own money replacing a veteran's broken reading glasses. Mia did not know the other Elena. The one who had shouted coordinates through a dying radio. The one who had signed a silence order with hands that still shook from exhaustion. The one whose name had been turned into initials because the living needed simpler stories. Quinn rotated the laptop toward Elena. Nurse Ward, the system is requesting your confirmation. On the screen, beneath the authorization box, appeared a prompt. Enter response phrase for Raven Bell survivor seal. Elena closed her eyes. She had hoped never to see those words again. Admiral Mercer's voice lowered. Elena. Not Nurse Ward. Elena. The name carried too much now. She opened her eyes and typed 4 words. Leave the light on. The laptop unlocked. A folder open. Inside were scanned pages, audio transcripts, redacted photographs, and one report title that made Strake's face lose color. Raven Bell Field Surgical Station. Final transmission and personnel actions. Mia whispered, What is this? Elena did not answer. Because the first file on the screen was not a report. It was a photograph. A younger Elena stood under a canvas shelter in a navy field jacket, hair tucked under a cap. Face thinner. Eyes older than they should have been. On her shoulder was a patch that looked like a small bell inside black wings. Beside her stood 3 medics, 2 nurses, and a young surgeon with dark hair and a confident smile. Dr. Malcolm Strake, Director Cho gripped the back of a chair. Mia looked from the photo to Elena, then back again. Admiral Mercer stared at the image as if it were burning. Quinn read the caption aloud. Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward, Surgical Response Nurse. Raven Bell. Strake said, That caption is wrong. Elena looked at him with tired eyes. No, Malcolm, she said. The caption is the only part they didn't change. The first real crack in Dr. Malcolm Strake's control was not anger. It was silence. He had been ready for denial, ready for outrage, ready to accuse Elena of confusion or the archive of error. But he had not been ready for the photograph. Photographs were cruel to men who survived by rearranging words. A report could be disputed. A memory could be called emotional. A nurse could be dismissed as unstable. But the photograph sat there without apology, showing the young surgeon standing beside the woman he had just humiliated in front of an entire auditorium. Director Cho lowered herself into a chair. I hired you 3 years ago, she said to Elena. From a civilian recovery unit in Bethesda. Elena nodded. Yes, ma'am. You never listed military command service. I was SEAL. But you were allowed to practice. My nursing credentials were never sealed. Only the deployment record and mission annex. Maya's eyes filled with tears she was trying not to show. You were a lieutenant commander. Temporary field commission, Elena said. Strake seized on that. Temporary? Exactly. Field designations were chaotic. People were given acting roles under pressure. It does not mean. Quinn cut him off. Doctor, the record says lead. He went still. Admiral Mercer had not taken his eyes off the screen. Played the final transmission. Elena's stomach tightened. Admiral, please. Everyone looked at her. It was the first time she had pleaded. Mercer heard it. He was a hard man, but not a careless one. Why not? Because there are voices on that tape that belong to families in that auditorium. His face flinched. Straight saw the opportunity. That is a convenient objection. Elena did not look at him. It is a human one. Mia stepped closer to her. Director Cho said nothing, but her expression changed, not from suspicion to belief, but from bureaucracy to sorrow. Mercer rubbed his thumb slowly against the edge of the conference table. My son was part of Grey Lantern. The room already knew this, but hearing him say it changed the walls. Lieutenant Evan Mercer had been one of the survivors whose rescue had made the operation famous. He had later left the service quietly and lived out of public view. The Admiral rarely spoke of him. Elena's face held steady, but her eyes lowered. I know, she said. Mercer heard something inside that answer. You knew him. Yes. Did he come through Ravenbell? Elena did not answer quickly enough. Strake's voice sharpened. Admiral, this is precisely why survivor privacy seals exist. We are dragging old patients into a staff dispute. Elena turned on him then. Not with volume, but with the full force of a restraint, finally reaching its limit. You did not care about survivor privacy when you stood at podiums and described decisions you did not make. The sentence struck him harder than shouting would have. Mia's mouth parted. Director Cho looked at Strake with a new kind of fear. Not fear of scandal. Fear of having trusted the wrong version of history. Quinn opened the personnel action file. There are commendation recommendations here. Many were suspended, pending review. Review by whom? Cho asked. Quinn scrolled. Joint Medical Command. Legal, Survivor Affairs. Then, a note. Delayed due to identity protection requests, Strake said. There. She requested the delay herself. Elena nodded. I did. Mercer looked at her. Why? For a moment, no one breathed. Elena saw the auditorium beyond the glass, the rows of people waiting for a ceremony to resume. She saw the first row, where families had come to hear names spoken with honor. She saw the empty chair with a reserved card for Evan Mercer, who had not appeared. She wondered if he still hated hospitals. She wondered if he remembered the promise. Her voice came quietly. Because the official story let survivors live without being turned into symbols. Strake scoffed. Beautiful. Meaningless. No, Mercer said. Strap. The Admiral's face had gone distant. My son used that word once. Symbol. He said everyone wanted him to be one. Elena did not move. Mercer looked at her. What did you promise him? The question was too precise. Elena felt the Oldfield station rise around her. Dim lamps, rain against canvas, voices low, because fear listened for weakness. Evan Mercer had been barely conscious but stubbornly lucid, ashamed of needing help. Ashamed of being the Admiral's son, terrified that every saved breath would become a headline. She had held a cup to his mouth and told him that inside Ravenbell, he was not a headline. He was only Evan. Elena swallowed. I promised I would write what mattered medically, she said, and bury what belonged to him personally. Mercer closed his eyes. Something in him, some old father's question, came dangerously close to breaking the Admiral. Then Strake said, and in burying things, you buried command structure, didn't you? Elena looked at him. He leaned forward, trying to reclaim the room through accusation. You want to speak of reports? Fine. The report says I assumed surgical command after communications failed. The report says I coordinated evacuation triage. The report says you were part of nursing support, perhaps valuable, perhaps brave, but not the person being implied here. Quinn scrolled again. Her eyes narrowed. Actually, she said, there is a discrepancy. Strake's jaw tightened. Quinn opened two documents side by side. Public citation draft and sealed annex. In the public citation, field command transfers to Dr. Malcolm Strake at 2,310 hours. In the sealed annex, Dr. Strake is listed as medically unavailable from 2,248 to 32. Director Cho whispered, unavailable. Strake's voice turned cold. That is a vague term. Quinn, read the next line. Relief by Ward Elena, acting surgical lead due to operational shock and command incapacity. The room changed again, not loudly. No one gasped this time. It was worse than that. Everyone became completely still. Strake's face went dark red. That is defamatory, Elena said. It was protected. Protected. He slammed his palm on the table, making Mia flinch. You signed a seal that hid my name under a word like incapacity. And you call that protection? Elena's eyes did not leave his. I signed a seal that kept that word from becoming your public identity. He had no answer, because he understood then, and so did the room. Elena had not stayed silent because she had nothing to say. She had stayed silent because her truth would have ruined more than one man. Admiral Mercer's voice was rough. You protected him. Elena looked tired enough to vanish. I protected the mission. Strake's mouth twisted. No, you protected yourself. You knew if the full tape came out, people would ask why a nurse gave field commands above a surgeon. They asked, Elena said. Then they sealed the answer. What answer? She looked at the screen. That titles matter less when people are losing hope, Mia whispered. Elena? But Elena's attention had shifted to the file lists. One item was highlighted at the bottom, newly decrypted by her passphrase. Audio transcript, Raven Bell final command. Quinn waited for Mercer. The Admiral looked at Elena. My eye. Elena's face tightened. The room had taken so much already. It had taken her ordinary life, her quiet name, her ability to pass unnoticed through the hospital corridors. But this tape was different. It contained voices, fear, trust. The exact moment a lie had become an official version, she could refuse. The survivor seal gave her that right. And if she refused, Strake might survive the day with just enough doubt to remain powerful. The ceremony might become rumor. Elena might return to trauma recovery as the nurse some people believed and others questioned. The forgotten names might stay forgotten because she was still trying to keep everyone safe from pain. Then she looked through the glass wall and saw the memorial table. The brass plate was no longer backward. For years, Elena had told herself that silence was mercy, but sometimes silence did not protect the wounded. Sometimes it protected the wound. She nodded. Play only the transcript, she said. No audio. Quinn opened it. The transcript appeared line by line. At first, it was all coded language, timestamps, weather interference, supply counts, evacuation delays. Then a line marked Strake. MA appeared, fragmented and uneven. I can't authorize that route. I can't see the field. I can't see the field. I can't. Then Ward E appeared. Malcolm, step back, sit down, breathe. Quinn, log transfer. I have medical command. Commander Quinn, reading her own surname attached to an older relative who had served as communications officer. Paused for half a second. Mercer noticed. Your father, my mother, Quinn said softly. Then she continued. Ward E. Raven Bell remains open. Triage by survivability and evacuation window. No one moves alone. Leave a light on. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Director Cho stared at Elena. as if seeing a stranger and a friend at once. Strake turned away from the screen. Mercer leaned closer, reading every line, as though it were scripture and sentence. Then another name appeared, Mercer, E. Elena closed her eyes. Quinn looked to the Admiral for permission. He gave no sign, but he did not stop her. Mercer, E. Don't call my father, Ward, E. I'm calling evacuation, not your father. Mercer, E. Promise. Ward, E. I promise you will be treated as a patient, not a symbol. The Admiral covered his mouth with one hand. No one spoke. The transcript continued for several more lines. But the room had already understood the shape of the truth. Elena had led the station. Strake had faltered. Survivors had been protected. Reports had been reshaped. Commendations had been delayed. A name had been turned into initials, and initials had been placed backward on a table, where the world almost missed them again. Then Quinn reached the final section. Ward, E. If this station goes quiet, list all medical staff as present and accounted until families are notified. No abandoned names, no missing honor. Mercer whispered, no missing honor. Elena opened her eyes. Strake said, enough. It was the wrong word. Everyone turned toward him. He looked cornered now, but still proud enough to mistake exposure for attack. You have no idea what that night was like. Elena's expression softened, and that softness seemed to anger him more than blame. I know exactly what it was like, she said. No, he snapped. You remember yourself as calm, because everyone needs a story where they were brave. I remember chaos. Yes, Elena said. You do. He stared at her. She stepped closer to the table, not threatening him, not humiliating him, just refusing to let him stand alone inside his lie. You froze, Malcolm, for 20 minutes, then for longer. You were not weak because you froze. You were human. But afterward, when the reports came, you let them turn my command into your recovery. You let them give you words that belong to others. And today, when you saw the marker, you did not protect the mission. You protected the lie. Strake's eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with a panic too old to still be fresh and too fresh to be healed. Mercer's voice came low. Doctor, Strake, did you know who Nurse Ward was when you pointed at her? Strake said nothing. Answer me. Strake looked at Elena, and for 1 second she saw the young surgeon from the photograph. The one before awards, before interviews, before years of applause built walls around his shame. Ah. Yes, he said. The word was barely audible. Director Cho sat back as though physically struck. Mia whispered, "Oh my God!" Mercer's face hardened. You knew. Strake lifted his chin. I knew a version of her. I did not know what the archive would say. Elena shook her head. You knew enough. He turned on her. And you knew enough to correct me years ago. Yes, she said. Then why didn't you? The question tore through the room because it sounded like accusation. But underneath, it was something else. Why did you let me become this? Elena's eyes glistened. Because I thought mercy could become truth later, she said. I was wrong. Beyond the glass wall, the auditorium waited. The ceremony that had begun as a public honoring had become a private reckoning. But private reckoning was no longer enough. The guests had seen the pointing. They had seen the Admiral freeze. They had seen Elena led away under suspicion. If the truth stayed behind the conference room door, humiliation would remain public and restoration would remain hidden. Director Cho understood first. She cannot go back out there as a rumor, she said. Mia nodded hard. They all saw what he did. Strake looked at Director Cho. You cannot possibly intend to air classified material in front of donors. No, Shaw said. Her voice trembled but did not break. I intend to correct the public wrong in the same room where it happened. Admiral Mercer looked at Elena. That choice belongs to Nurse Ward. Alina almost laughed at the bitter beauty of it. After years of systems deciding what people could know, suddenly, the room wanted her consent. She looked again at the transcript, at Evan Mercer's plea, at the line where she promised he would not become a symbol. She looked at Strake, whose career had been built partly on her silence, but whose fear had once been real. She looked at Mia, who was young enough to still believe truth, once spoken, would behave cleanly. It would not. Truth never entered a room without breaking something. But sometimes broken things finally let light through. Alina touched the brass edge of her hospital badge. "I will not play survivor voices," she said. "I will not name patients who are not already public. I will not let this become a spectacle." Mercer nodded. "Agreed. But the record will be corrected. I.S. and the names omitted from the ceremony will be spoken." Mercer's eyes moved to the memorial table beyond the glass. "All of them," he said. Alina took one breath, then another. "And Dr. Strake will not stand at that podium alone." Strake's head snapped toward her. For the first time, Alina's voice carried the authority everyone had been trying to explain through files. "He can stand there," she said, "but he will stand in the truth." The auditorium had changed while they were gone. No one sat comfortably anymore. People clustered in low conversations. The first row of officers spoke in clipped tones. Families whispered over programs. Hospital staff looked toward the side door again and again. The memorial table remained lit, and the tiny brass plate at the corner had somehow become the center of the room. Everyone could feel it. Something small had disturbed something enormous. When the side door opened, silence traveled faster than announcement. Director Cho entered first. Her face was composed, but her hands were clasped too tightly. Commander Quinn followed with the secure laptop closed against her side. Dr. Strake came next, no longer walking like the room belonged to him. Then Alina stepped into view. She did not look transformed. That was what made the moment powerful. She was still in white scrubs, still in the dark cardigan, still wearing the simple badge. But people saw her differently now, because the powerful people around her did. Mia walked a few steps behind, chin raised, daring anyone to look at Alina with contempt again. Admiral Mercer returned to the podium. He stood there for a long moment without speaking. The room waited for an explanation, a polished apology, a military phrase that would make confusion feel orderly. Mercer gave them none of those at first. He looked down at his prepared speech. Then he folded it once and set it aside. "This ceremony began with an error," he said. Every person in the room seemed to lean forward. "Not the error you witnessed on this stage. That was only the last visible sign of an older failure." Strake closed his eyes briefly. Alina stood beside the memorial table, not on the stage. She had refused the stage. She would let the truth stand there before she did. Mercer continued. "Operation Ray Lantern saved lives under conditions most people in this room will never be asked to imagine. For years, parts of that mission remained sealed to protect survivors and families. That protection was necessary. But protection became omission. Omission became distortion. And distortion allowed honor to pass over people who had earned it. The room was so quiet, Alina could hear the faint hum of the ceiling lights. Mercer turned to the memorial table. "There is a marker on this table, labeled EW, Raven Bell. Many of you were not told what Raven Bell was. You were not told because those words lived inside a sealed annex." He paused. Then he looked directly at Alina. "When I arrived today, I read a hospital badge aloud. Elena Ward." His voice faltered on the name. And again, just as before, the Admiral froze. This time, everyone saw why it mattered. Not because a nurse had been caught near a display. Not because a name was suspicious. Because the name had reached into the Admiral's past and pulled out a debt he had never been allowed to pay. Mercer ripped the podium. For a second, he was not a decorated officer. He was a father, an old witness, a man realizing that the person who had carried his son through the worst night of his life had been standing unnoticed in a hospital auditorium, while another man pointed at her. He forced himself to continue. That name appears in the sealed annex as Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Ward, Raven Bell, Lead, Field Surgical Response. A sound moved through the audience. Not applause. Not yet. Shock had its own sound, a collective inhale after years of wrong assumptions. Maya's eyes filled again. Director Cho looked down. Strake stared at the floor. Mercer said, Nurse Ward did not ask for this recognition today. She did not arrange this marker. She did not interrupt this ceremony for personal credit. She corrected a memorial plate because even when the world forgot her, she did not forget the others. Eleanor's throat tightened. An elderly woman in the second row began crying silently. Eleanor recognized her from the family reception list. Her brother had been one of the medics whose name had appeared only as support staff in the public record. Mercer lifted a sheet of paper Commander Wynne had handed him. The corrected record identifies Raven Bell as a field surgical station held open beyond expected communication loss. It identifies several personnel whose actions were omitted or minimized in the public summary. Today, we will speak those names. He began with the medics. He spoke each name slowly. Not all were alive. Not all families were present. But with every name, the room shifted from scandal toward reverence. People sat straighter. Programs lowered. Phones stayed down. Even the donors, who had arrived expecting photographs, seemed to understand that recording this would cheapen it. Then Mercer reached the last name on the corrected list. Eleanor Ward. He stopped, his lips pressed together, and his eyes shone. The Admiral who had commanded fleets, briefed presidents, and stood before grieving families could not immediately say the next sentence. Elena wanted to save him from it. Saving powerful men from emotional exposure had been one of her worst habits. She almost stepped forward. Then she stopped herself. This was not hers to carry. Mercer drew a breath. Elena Ward held Raven Bell open, he said. She assumed command when command failed. She protected patients, staff, and survivors. She requested privacy measures that delayed her own recognition. And today in this room, she was publicly dismissed by a man who knew enough to know better. The room turned towards Strake. He did not lift his head. Mercer said, Dr. Malcolm Strake will address that. Strake stood motionless. For years he had spoken easily under lights. He had delivered keynote lectures, award remarks, trauma leadership seminars. He knew how to pause for applause and lower his voice for sincerity. But none of that language belonged to him now. He walked to the podium like a man approaching a sentence. Elena watched him with no satisfaction. She had imagined this moment before, in anger, in grief, in exhausted fantasies after double shifts. She had imagined him exposed and herself vindicated. She had imagined applause washing away the years. But real justice did not feel like victory. It felt like standing in the wreckage and deciding what could still be repaired. Strake placed both hands on the podium. I owe Nurse Ward an apology, he said. Mia whispered, louder. Elena almost smiled despite everything. Strake heard her. He lifted his head. I owe Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Ward an apology, he said, louder now. And I owe this room the truth. During Operation Grey Lantern, I failed in a moment when others needed me. That failure was documented in a sealed record. Nurse Ward did not expose it publicly. She did not use it against me. She allowed the official story to protect survivors, and it also protected me. His voice roughened. I repaid that protection with arrogance. No one moved. I accepted praise that belonged more widely than it was given. I allowed people to believe I carried command alone. And today, when I saw a marker that threatened that story, I pointed at the person who had the most right to stand beside it. He turned toward Elena. I am sorry, The apology did not fix it. Elena knew that. Everyone knew that. But it did something. It removed one stone from the wall. Admiral Mercer returned to the microphone. Dr. Strake's institutional honors connected to the incomplete Gray Lantern citation will be placed under review by the board and military liaison office. Harbor Ridge will issue a corrected record. That process begins today. Director Cho nodded, pale but firm. Then Mercer looked at Elena. Nurse Ward, will you join me? Elena did not move at first. The room waited. For years, she had avoided stages. Stage turned people into objects. Heroes, villains, symbol, warning. She was afraid that if she stepped up there, the world would stop seeing the nurse and start seeing only the secret. Mia touched her elbow. Not pushing, just present. Elena stepped onto the stage. The applause began before she reached the podium. Soft at first, uncertain. Then rising as people stood. The elderly woman in the second row stood with one hand over her heart. The officers stood. The hospital staff stood. Mia stood so fast her chair struck the row behind her. Elena wished they would sit. She also needed them to stand. Both things were true. Mercer removed a small case from inside his jacket. This was prepared years ago, he said quietly. So only Elena and the first row heard? It was never delivered. He opened it. Inside was not a metal designed for cameras, but a service badge, aged slightly at the edges, its ribbon folded with almost painful care. Elena recognized the shape before her mind accepted it. Raven Bell Medical Command Commendation. Her vision blurred. I can't, she whispered. Mercer's answer was barely audible. You already did. He pinned it beside her hospital badge. For a moment, the two identities touched. Elena Ward, RN, and Lieutenant Commander Elena Ward, Raven Bell lead. Not one replacing the other. Both finally allowed to exist on the same chest. The applause faded when Elena leaned toward the microphone. She had not planned to speak, but silence had made too many decisions for too long. I was angry for many years, she said. The honesty startled the room more than any polished speech could have. I thought I was angry because no one knew my name. Later, I understood I was angry because I kept hearing other names disappear too. Medics became support, nurses became staff. Patients became numbers. Fear became weakness. Silence became honor. And after a while, the record looked clean because all the human parts had been removed. She looked at the families. Your loved ones were not footnotes. The elderly woman sobbed once softly. Elena continued. The people who survived were not symbols. They were human beings. Some were brave. Some were terrified. Most were both. That is not shameful. That is the truth. Her eyes moved to Strake. And truth should not be used only to destroy. It should be used to correct what silence damaged. Strake lowered his head. Elena looked back at the audience. I did not come here today for a medal. I came because a patient's daughter asked me to help her grandfather find his seat. That is still my job. I am a nurse. I notice what is out of place. A chair, a chart, a nameplate, a person no one is listening to. A small, emotional laugh moved through the staff rows. Elena touched the newly pinned badge. If you remember anything from today, remember this. Honor is not restored when powerful people feel embarrassed. Honor is restored when the forgotten are named correctly. She stepped back. This time the applause did not feel like noise. It felt like names returning. Later, after the ceremony ended, the auditorium emptied slowly. No one seemed willing to leave quickly. People approached the memorial table in silence, reading the corrected names Commander Quinn had printed and placed beside the old program. Some touched the edges of the paper as if it were a sacred object. Families who had arrived expecting a formal speech found themselves speaking to one another about years of unanswered questions. Hospital staff stood in small clusters, shaken by how close they had come to accepting another public humiliation as normal. Elena escaped to the side hallway before anyone could surround her. Mia found her there, beside a vending machine humming under fluorescent lights. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Mia said, "So, Lieutenant Commander." Elena closed her eyes. "Please don't." Mia nodded seriously. "Okay, Mom." Elena gave her a look. Mia burst into a shaky laugh, then covered her face as tears came. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm laughing. Because today was too much. Because today was too much. Because you were right there," Mia said, wiping her cheeks. "All this time, you trained me how to check a pulse on anxious families, how to talk to veterans who hate alarms, how to chart without making patients sound like problems. And you never said any of this." Elena leaned against the wall. The badge felt heavier than metal should feel. I didn't know how to say it without becoming trapped by it. Maya's voice softened. "Are you angry at me for not knowing?" "No, I'm angry at me." "Don't be," Elena said. "You saw me before you knew the story. That matters more." Mia looked down the hall toward the auditorium. What happens now? Elena had been asking herself the same question. Corrected records did not correct the lonely years. Apologies did not erase public contempt. A medal did not bring back the people whose names were only now being spoken. But something had shifted. The hospital could never again pretend Elena was only the quiet nurse in the cardigan. And Elena could never again pretend that hiding was the same as healing. Footsteps approached. Admiral Mercer stopped a respectful distance away. Without the podium, without the room watching, he looked older. "Mia," Elena said gently. "Give us a moment." Mia hesitated. Elena touched her arm. "I'm all right." Mia looked at the Admiral as if warning him not to mishandle her mentor, then walked away. Mercer waited until she was gone. "My son should be here," he said. Elena did not answer. "He wanted to come." He made it to the parking lot. That struck her harder than expected. Mercer looked toward the exit doors. "He still cannot sit in rooms full of uniforms and applause. But he asked me to give you something if I found the courage." He held out an envelope. Elena stared at it. Her name was written across the front in careful handwriting. Not Lieutenant Commander, not Nurse Ward, Elena. Her fingers trembled when she took it. Mercer's voice thickened. "I did not know your name. Not truly. He tried once to tell me about a nurse who kept the light on. I thought he meant comfort. I did not understand he meant command." Elena held the envelope against her chest. "He survived because he chose to," she said. Mercer shook his head. "He survived because people like you refused to let him become a story before he was ready to be a man again." The words moved through her like grief finding a door. For years she had wondered whether her promise had mattered, whether silence had helped Evan or merely helped everyone else avoid discomfort. Now she knew at least part of the answer. He had lived, not publicly, not cleanly. Mercer straightened, trying and failing to return fully to rank. "I owe you more than an apology." Elena looked at him. "You owe the corrected record to everyone. That will happen. That will happen. That is enough." "No," he said quietly. "It is not, but I understand it might be all you will accept today." She almost smiled. He glanced toward the auditorium. "Dr. Strake has resigned from the ceremony board pending review." Elena felt no triumph. "Make sure the review is fair," she said. Mercer studied her. "After what he did, especially after what he did. If we correct a false record by creating another one, nothing changes." The Admiral looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Raven Bell lead to the end." Elena looked away. I'm just a nurse. No, Mercer said. You are a nurse. There is no just in that sentence. He left her with the envelope. Elena waited until the hallway emptied before opening it. Inside was a folded letter. The handwriting was Evan Mercer's. Older now, steadier than the frightened young voice in the transcript, but still carrying something she remembered. Nurse Ward, I do not know if my father will find you today. I do not know if you want to be found. But if he says your name and stops speaking, forgive him. He has spent years grieving people he did not know how to thank. I remember the light. I remember being angry that you would not let me disappear into my last name. I remember you telling me fear was not a failure of rank. I have repeated that sentence to myself more times than you can know. You kept your promise. I got to become a person again before anyone made me a symbol. But I am older now, and I understand something I did not understand then. You should not have had to disappear too. If they speak your name today, let them. Elena pressed the letter to her mouth and finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the years to move. The next morning, Harbor Ridge looked the same from the outside. Ambulances arrived under the covered entrance. Residents hurried in with coffee. Families stood at the information desk holding appointment papers. The world had a way of continuing after revelations, which was both cruel and merciful. But inside, things had changed. The memorial display had been moved from the auditorium to the main corridor, where patients, staff, and visitors passed every day. The corrected names were engraved on a temporary plaque, while the permanent one was being made. At the bottom, beneath the official language, someone had added a small line approved by Director Cho. No missing honor. Alina saw it before her shift and stopped. Mia found her there with 2 coffees. I brought the terrible one you like, Mia said. Thank you. They stood side by side. A resident passing by saw Eleanor, looked at the badge pin beside her hospital ID, and straightened almost comically. Good morning, Nurse Ward. Elena sighed. If everyone starts saluting, I'm transferring. Mia grinned. I tell them. Telena gave her the coffee back. Kidding, Mia said quickly, returning it. Their laughter faded when Dr. Strake appeared at the far end of the corridor. He was not in a white coat. For the first time Elena could remember, he looked like a man not performing authority. He stopped several feet away. Mia stiffened. Elena touched her sleeve. It's okay. Strake looked at the memorial plaque, then at Elena. I met with the review board this morning, he said. Elena waited. I told them the public citation should be withdrawn. Maya's eyebrows rose. Strake continued. I also gave Commander Wynne my personal notes from after Grey Lantern. The ones I did not submit. That matters, Elena said. He nodded once, though he seemed unable to accept grace comfortably. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. His face tightened. Do you hate me? It was a question Elena might once have answered differently, but hate required a kind of daily devotion she no longer wanted to give him. No, she said. I hate what fear made you protect. He absorbed that. Then he looked at the line on the plaque. No missing honor. I was afraid that if people knew I froze, everything I did afterward would mean nothing. Elena's voice was gentle, but not soft enough to let him hide. And because you were afraid of becoming nothing, you let others become invisible. He closed his eyes briefly. Sa. Single honest word was worth more than the apology at the podium. A call came over the hospital speaker, requesting trauma recovery support for an incoming transfer. Not a dramatic emergency, not a cinematic crisis, just work, human work, the kind that never ended and rarely came with applause. Elena handed Mia her coffee. Come on. Mia blinked. You're taking the call? I'm on shift. Strake stepped aside. As Elena passed him, he said, Lieutenant Commander. She stopped. The corridor seemed to listen. Elena turned back. Nurse Ward is fine. For a second Strake looked confused. Then he understood. She was not rejecting the honor. She was choosing the name that let her continue serving. He nodded. Nurse Ward. Elena walked toward the unit with Mia beside her. At the nurse's station, an elderly veteran sat in a wheelchair arguing politely with a clerk about whether he needed assistance. His daughter looked exhausted. A resident was searching for a chart. A monitor alarm chirped from a room where a patient had rolled onto a sensor. Ordinary chaos. Ordinary fear. Ordinary chances to restore dignity before anyone called it heroism. Elena stepped into it with practiced calm. Let's start again, she told the veteran, kneeling so she was at eye level. Tell me what you need, not what everyone keeps assuming. The man looked at her badge, then at her face. I need people to stop talking over me. Elena smiled. That, she said, we can do by noon. The story had already begun spreading beyond the hospital. News outlets requested comment. Military forums debated sealed records. Former staff sent messages. Some praised Elena. Some questioned the delay. Some wanted scandal, punishment, spectacle. Director Cho asked Elena if she wanted media protection. Elena said she wanted staffing ratios fixed on the recovery floor. Cho stared at her, then laughed so suddenly she had to sit down. You are impossible, the director said. No, Elena replied. I'm practical. But that afternoon, Elena agreed to one recorded statement for the hospital archive. Not for television, not for donors, for future staff orientation. She stood in front of the memorial plaque with Mia behind the camera and Admiral Mercer beside the display. Not speaking, only witnessing, Elena looked into the lens. My name is Elena Ward, she said. I am a nurse at Harbor Ridge Military Medical Center. Years ago, I served in a field station called Raven Bell. For a long time, parts of that service were sealed for reasons that were human before they were political. Some silence was necessary. Some silence lasted too long. She paused. Mia held the camera steady. Elena continued, if you work in this hospital, you will meet people whose records do not tell the whole truth. Patients who are more than their charts. Staff who are more than their titles. Families who are carrying questions no form asks. Do not assume the quietest person in the room has the least to say. Her eyes shifted briefly to the plaque. And when you find a name, turn backward, turn it around. Mia lowered the camera when it was over. That was perfect, she said. Elena shook her head. It was enough. That evening, after her shift, Elena returned alone to the auditorium. The stage was empty. The chairs had been stacked. No lights, no applause, no accusing finger. Only the faint smell of polished wood and old coffee. She stood where Strake had pointed at her. For a moment she let herself remember how it felt. The heat in her face, the eyes turning, the old instinct to disappear. Then she walked to the place where Admiral Mercer had stood when he said her name and froze. She understood now that his freezing had not been weakness. It had been recognition arriving faster than the body could bear. The same had happened to her when she saw the brass plate. The past did not always return as memory. Sometimes it returned as a name spoken in public. Elena took Evan's letter from her pocket and unfolded it once more. If they speak your name today, let them, she had. The room had not ended. Neither had she. The next week, the permanent plaque was installed. It listed every corrected name from the Raven Bell Annex, including those who had served without rank impressive enough for old speeches. At the bottom, the final line remained. No missing honor. People stopped there often. Some read quickly and moved on. Some stood for a long time. A few cried. Once, Elena saw Dr. Strake standing before it alone, his hands folded, his head bowed. She did not interrupt him. Mercy did not mean pretending harm had not happened. It meant refusing to let harm write the final record. Months later, new nurses at Harbor Ridge would hear the story during orientation. They would hear that a trauma surgeon once pointed at a nurse in front of an entire ceremony and tried to remove her from a history she had carried in silence. They would hear that an admiral read her name and froze because the forgotten truth had finally found its way into the room. They would hear about the corrected file, the sealed report, the brass marker, the apology, the plaque. But if they were lucky, they would also meet Elena Ward on a busy shift. They would see her adjust a blanket without waking a patient. They would see her correct a chart before a mistake became harm. They would see her kneel beside frightened people and ask what they needed. They would see that restored honor did not make her louder. It made the world listen more carefully. And sometimes, in the quietest corner of the hospital corridor, that was enough. The world often celebrates the person at the podium and forgets the one holding the room together when everything falls apart. Elena Ward never needed a stage to be honorable. She only needed the truth to stop hiding. If her story moved you, comment your country below and subscribe to Forgotten Honor Files for more stories where forgotten service finally gets its name back.